The clink of crystal glasses rang out like a symphony of deception. The chandelier suspended from Aria's ceiling scattered beams of light like falling stars, illuminating designer gowns, Patek watches, and smiles stretched tight with Botox. But to Julian Croft, it was all just polish over cracked paint. He sat alone at table 17, the one facing Central Park, once his father's favorite seat. The founder of Aria. In a modest tweed suit and silent leather shoes, no one at the party realized the man sipping cabernet was the true owner of this empire. And that's exactly how he wanted it. Revenue was strong, but profit margins were shrinking. Staff turnover was rising. Reports came back too perfect, too clean. And it was that perfection that made Julian suspicious. That suspicion led him here not as CEO, but as a quiet food writer observing the shadows of his own creation. A soft voice spoke. "Good evening, sir. Here's the wine you requested." 2015 Screaming Eagle. Julian looked up. The waitress was a strange discord in this polished orchestra. It wasn't the uniform it matched the others. It was her eyes. Eyes that held the depth of a nocturne. Her walk was like she belonged on stage, yet her steps barely touched the floor, as if drifting through memory. "Thank you," he replied, accepting the glass. But when she placed the bill on the table, something unusual happened. A napkin folded into quarters was subtly tucked between the receipts. Julian quietly unfolded it beneath the table. The handwriting was messy but deliberate. "They know you're here. The ghost of your father is watching. Get out." For a moment, the air around him froze. His chest tightened as if an invisible hand had begun to squeeze. The words weren't just a warning. They were a blade slicing straight through Julian's deepest wound, the mysterious death of his father. The man who once poured his soul into every dish at Aria before it all collapsed. Who knew he was here, and who had the nerve to speak of his father as though he still lingered. He looked up only to see the same plastic smiles and raised glasses. No trace of the girl. But then a fleeting glance from the bar, those eyes, still her. Ilara, eyes that tossed him a key, then disappeared into the crowd. Julian suddenly understood tonight wasn't about wine. It was the night Aria's mask began to crack. Julian sat motionless in his suite at the Ritz-Carlton, the soft amber light not warm enough to chase away the chill gripping his mind. The torn napkin still lay on the table next to a half-finished glass of wine. He stared at it as if it might resurrect his father, or at the very least answer the question he had avoided for 10 years. His father had known who the traitor was, so why did he choose silence until his final breath? Julian had never forgiven that silence. And he had never forgiven himself for not seeing it sooner. When his father took his own life, people called it a death of honor. But Julian knew the truth. It was the death of a man betrayed by the one he trusted most, Marcus Thorne. Afterward, Julian gathered the shattered pieces, sold off real estate, liquidated shares, and rebuilt the Croft empire with his own blood and quiet fury. Yet no matter how restored the company became, no matter how bright Aria's spotlight returned, he still couldn't sleep through the sound of clinking glasses. And now, with numbers once again too perfect, he had a sinking feeling that history was repeating itself. Ilara let down her hair in front of the mirror, unclipping the worn plastic barrette with chipped paint. Her tiny one-bedroom apartment in Queens was quiet, filled only with the soft strains of classical music from an old speaker and the steady breathing of little Lily sleeping in the next room. Ilara hadn't always been a waitress. Once her fingers danced across piano keys, as if speaking to God himself. Graduated from Juilliard at 21. Debuted at Carnegie Hall at 22. But applause couldn't save her from her ex-husband, a man with warm hands and a heart like steel. After a humiliating divorce trial, Ilara's career fell apart as swiftly as she'd once taken the stage silently, with no one to catch her. She took the job at Aria not for the paycheck, but because it was close to Lily's school. She wanted her daughter to grow up in a better zip code, and more importantly, she needed to stay hidden from the past. But tonight, when she saw Julian, something inside her ripped open. Not because of his fame, but because she had once met his father at a charity concert many years ago. The man had said something she never forgot. A restaurant only deserves to exist if it feeds the human soul. At the time, she thought it was romantic nonsense. Now she knew he had been right. Aria no longer had a soul. It was a counterfeit stage for laundered money, where a $300 dessert couldn't buy a sliver of decency. And she knew if Julian didn't leave, the place would devour him, just like it did his father. But she also knew one more thing: Julian Croft was not the kind of man who runs. Nighttime New York felt like an inverted universe, lights bursting across the sky above, while below lost souls drifted past one another unseen and untouched. But tonight, on the wind-whipped rooftop of an abandoned building behind Grand Central Station, two people stood face to face and saw each other more clearly than ever before. Ilara stepped out from the emergency exit, her thin coat flaring in the wind, one hand clutching her purse, as if it contained her entire life. Julian was already there, leaning against the railing, his gaze not on the city, but fixed squarely on her. No suspicion, no anger, only a stillness like water before a storm. "I don't believe in coincidences," Julian spoke, his voice low and sharp like a blade honed by years of loss, especially when it comes wrapped in a warning that smells like old blood. Ilara didn't deflect. "I don't know who wrote that napkin, but I know it's true." She explained slowly, her voice as even as a slowed-down soundtrack. Aria was not just a restaurant. It was a laundering hub for a dark financial network disguised behind vintage wines, doctored invoices, and manipulated data. Marcus Thorne was the head. Not just vice president, he was the coiled serpent at the heart of the Croft empire, entrusted and empowered by Julian himself. "No one at the restaurant knows," Ilara said. "Just a few high-level admin staff. And me. I know because I overheard a call, and because afterward he came for me." Julian frowned. Ilara reached into her necklace and pulled out a memory card no larger than a fingernail. "This is the recording. Just a fragment, but enough to prove what he's using the restaurant for." Julian took it. But what stunned him wasn't the evidence, it was the look in her eyes as she lifted her chin. There was no fear. Only one thing: conviction. "You think I'm doing this for you?" she said, her smile edged with something far from softness. "I'm doing it for my daughter. Because I've lost too much to stand by and watch a man like him destroy what's left of your father's legacy." Julian was silent for a long time. "Do you even know how much he hated my family?" he asked, voice nearly hoarse. "Thorne was once my father's trusted aide, but my father appointed someone else as interim CEO before he died. Thorne never forgave that." Ilara nodded. "I figured. He doesn't just want money. He wants to recreate the pain, wants to see you dismantled like your father." Step by step, the wind howled above them like a curse, and in the middle of the glittering New York skyline, two strangers stood across from one another, as if they were the last witnesses of a vow unspoken: history will not repeat itself, even if they have to break every rule to stop it. The executive office of Aria sat atop the highest floor, a hushed space walled with bulletproof glass overlooking Central Park, decorated with meticulously framed photographs like a private museum of power. At its center, Marcus Thorne stood pouring whiskey from a 1946 Glenlivet. The golden light from the overhead fixture made the liquid in his glass gleam like molten metal. Julian sat across from him, not hiding his wariness. But Thorne was different. He seemed strangely at ease, as if this were a casual afternoon meeting. His top jacket button was undone, shirt cuffs slightly rolled up, revealing a vintage Omega watch, a subtle signal for those fluent in the old language of power games. "Julian, I must say, your unannounced visit is both surprising and entertaining," he said, raising his glass. "Truth be told, I've always respected owners who are willing to step into the kitchen themselves." Julian didn't reply. His gaze tracked Thorne's fingers, his movements like a panther waiting for the slightest slip in its prey. "You must have heard a few rumors," Thorne continued, his smile curving like a scythe. "Aria is second only to the dessert menu when it comes to gossip." "I don't believe in rumors," Julian cut in. "I believe in data." "Of course," Thorne shrugged. "Just as I believe in loyalty and the consequences of lacking it." He strolled toward the wine cabinet, speaking as he walked. "Ilara is quite the hidden gem, don't you think? I don't know if you've noticed, but there's a certain artistic calmness about her. Shame, really." Julian's brow tightened. Thorne turned back toward him, eyes gleaming like quicksilver. "You know," he said slowly, "I've always had a soft spot for single mothers. In New York, they're an endangered species if they're not careful. One small accident, a misunderstanding, and they can lose everything. Their job, their home, and sometimes even their child." Julian shot to his feet, but Thorne held up a hand. "Relax. I'm just speaking hypothetically. She really is a devoted mother. Lily, isn't it?" That name landed like a stone thrown onto a frozen lake. Julian said nothing, but his entire frame stiffened. Thorne shrugged again, unfazed. "You know I'm not making threats. I'm simply offering observations. As a friend, or someone who witnessed your father's collapse from very, very close." And in that moment, Julian understood. Thorne wasn't just playing politics. He was the kind of man who didn't need weapons. His words were blades sharp enough to draw blood. And he had just sliced clean through Julian's chest, right where the old wounds had never truly healed. He wanted Julian to lose control. He wanted history to repeat itself. But this time, Julian wasn't the grieving son sitting at a funeral table. This time, he was the man rewriting the ending. Julian didn't believe in coincidences, but the file delivered that morning made him want to believe in something. Anything other than the truth unraveling before his eyes. The dossier came from Nathan Cole, a former FBI agent, now a private investigator Julian had quietly hired 3 weeks ago. The man had once dismantled a corruption ring in the healthcare industry, not the kind easily manipulated. And if he was the one delivering this file, whatever was inside had to be something Julian couldn't ignore. The first page showed a photo of Ilara standing in the alley behind Aria, accepting a thick envelope from Thorne. The image quality wasn't perfect, but unmistakable. Next came a bank statement, a $50,000 cash deposit into an account under the name Ilara Vance, dated just 2 days after their rooftop meeting. Finally, an audio recording. Grainy, but Ilara's voice was clear. "He's here, and he's starting to suspect. Time to reel in the big fish." The sentence was simple, but to Julian, it felt like an axe swinging into the fragile trust he had only just begun to rebuild. He sat in his Manhattan apartment office, the silence so complete that the soft hum of the air conditioner felt like monsters growling in his head. There had once been someone his father trusted, someone who said all the right things, who seemed harmless enough. That man helped drive his father to suicide, leaving behind a stained legacy. And now Ilara's image emerged like a spreading crack across the glass surface of memory. "I thought you were different. You looked at me like you understood the scars I never dared name. So what was your price?" Julian arranged to meet her at a small cafe in East Village where no one knew their names. No visible tension, just a voice calm as a frozen lake. He slid the file across the table to her. "Do you have anything to say?" Alara opened the folder. She didn't speak for a few seconds, only exhaled softly. "Julian, this is a setup." But he cut her off. "I've heard that line before. Too many times. From people who stepped over my father's corpse to climb their way up." Alara didn't cry, but her eyes that once held the aching beauty of a melancholy sonata now looked like the music had died. Julian stood, not looking back. He walked away, carrying with him the last shred of trust, now torn to pieces, just like the napkin had warned, "The ghost of your father is watching." That night, Alara sat beside the bed, watching Lily sleep. The apartment had only one bedroom, so the sofa in the living room had been her bed for months. But tonight, she couldn't lie down, couldn't sleep, couldn't breathe evenly. Lily's sketchbook lay open on the table. A crayon portrait, Mommy and Me, showed two stick figures holding hands in a field of flowers. Alara traced the page with her finger. It wasn't her dream. It was the only thing she hadn't lost. Julian hadn't believed her. That hurt. But not as much as knowing Thorn had made the perfect move. He didn't need to kill anyone. All he had to do was plant a seed of doubt at the right moment in the right place, and then watch everything fall apart. The envelope of money, it was real. But she'd never touched it. He had dumped it into her account as a trap. The audio recording doctored that sentence was lifted from an entirely different conversation, sliced and stitched out of context. And the photo, yes, she had met Thorn in that alley. He threatened her as always, but no camera had captured the moment he whispered about Lily, or those hypothetical accidents. She had no evidence, no power, and now not even an ally. Alara knew Thorn wouldn't stop there. He wanted to silence her, permanently. She had come too close, learned too much. And he had once said it outright: single mothers in New York are easy to make disappear. She couldn't go to the police. The anonymous calls she'd made before led nowhere. A few officers showed up at Aria, then vanished just as quickly. She couldn't reach out to Julian, not after he looked at her like a traitor. And then, in her despair, one name came to her: Antoine, the aging French head chef. Quiet, aloof, always keeping to himself. He was the only one at Aria who never fawned over Thorn, and never looked at Alara with disdain. More importantly, he had worked with Julian's father from Aria's earliest days. The next morning, Alara arrived before the restaurant opened. She knocked gently on the kitchen door. Antoine looked up from his pan of simmering sauce. No surprise, no questions. He just stared at her, long and steady. "Alara," he said, his voice rough as a whetstone against steel. "Tell me everything." They spoke in the empty kitchen, oregano still clinging to his sleeves, and there they made a plan. Thorn was preparing for a charity gala, the most lavish of the year. That would be the night he transferred data from the old servers to a new encrypted drive and wiped all traces of his laundering. After that night, he would disappear with the financial records and a reputation polished by a few more $1 million. Alara and Antoine knew there would be one shot to breach the system before him, back up the data, and deliver it to someone Thorn couldn't buy. For the first time in years, Alara wasn't just a mother or a musician who missed her train. She was the only one brave enough to bet everything not to survive, but to reclaim the truth. Aria had never looked more magnificent. From the outside, it resembled a glass palace erected in the heart of Manhattan. Hundreds of luxury cars lined the curb, couture gowns and tuxedos glided across the red carpet. Inside, classical symphonies swelled through the air, Dom Perignon flowed endlessly, and crystal chandeliers framed the room like frozen galaxies. On a small stage, Marcus Thorn held the microphone, his voice warm and theatrical, like a seasoned Broadway performer. Tonight we gather not only to celebrate Aria's success, but to share with the community. Because every meal served at Aria is a piece of love. Applause thundered across the hall. Live stream cameras panned the crowd, politicians, investors, all beaming. None realized they too were part of the dirty game unfolding behind the scenes. At the back of the restaurant, Julian Croft stood alone. His tuxedo was immaculate, but couldn't mask the exhaustion in his eyes. In his hand was the final transfer agreement. Signing it would mean severing himself from Aria, the last thing tying him to his father. Elsewhere down a service hallway, Ilara moved like a shadow in her staff uniform. A small Bluetooth earpiece hid beneath her curls. In her hand was a keycard from Antoine leading to the server room. Antoine himself was in the kitchen preparing foie gras, or at least pretending to. They had 3 minutes before the system auto-erased all legacy data. A soft beep. The server room door unlocked. Ilara stepped inside, her heart pounding like a war drum. Dozens of files glowed on the screen. She plugged in the external drive. The progress bar began to climb. 35%, 62%, 87%. Then a shadow was behind her. Thorne. No alarms, no shouts. He held a kitchen knife as casually as if prepping sashimi. "You thought you could win," he whispered. "I let Julian's father die in silence. You think I won't do the same to you?" He pressed the blade to her neck just enough to draw blood. "Right now," he said, eyes locking on the security camera overhead, "Julian is watching us." Out on the gala floor, Julian's phone buzzed. A message from an anonymous number: "Open your tablet." Camera 6. He did. The screen lit up, Ilara restrained. The knife, the blood. Thorne's face up close. His voice crackled from the device, every word chilling. "Another good man who trusted the wrong woman. Sign it, or she dies." And Aria will forever be a Croft-branded joke. The ballroom was still buzzing, still champagne and laughter. But in Julian's mind, time froze. He could do what his father did, bow his head sign, and survive in shame. Or choose something else. Julian drew a deep breath and stepped into a nearby control room. He typed a sequence into the internal system. Fire alarm activated. The alarm screamed like truth breaking free from years of silence. Sprinklers exploded from the ceiling, drenching the ballroom. Guests screamed. Lights flickered. Chaos erupted. Amid the panic, Nathan Cole, Julian's private investigator, and a covert security team stormed the server room. Thorne was subdued in seconds. Ilara collapsed to the floor, breathless but still clutching the drive. Police arrived 10 minutes later, reporters 20, and all of New York's elite, soaked to the bone in $1,000 attire, stood and watched as Marcus Thorne was led away in handcuffs, flashbulbs exploding, whispers erupting. One man behind Julian muttered, "God, that's the CEO of Aria." Julian turned, eyes calm, not angry, just quietly at peace. For the first time in years. The small Brooklyn bar was called Obad. No sign, no promotions. Just a sliding wooden door that opened into a space bathed in soft amber light, the scent of old leather and sandalwood lingering in the air. A tiny stage hugged the far wall, just enough room for a piano and a storyteller who didn't need words. Tonight, Ilara Vance sat on that stage, fingers gliding across the keys as if rewriting a chapter of her life. No one announced her. No one needed her name. But when the first notes drifted into the room, a sonata somewhere between jazz and classical, the whole place held its breath. It wasn't that she played flawlessly. It was that every note was real. Since the gala, Ilara hadn't returned to Aria. She declined every performance offer, took a part-time job teaching piano at a local elementary school, and occasionally played here where no one expected perfection, only sincerity. At a table near the stage, Julian sat quietly, sleeves rolled up, no tie, no CEO mask. Lily slept in his arms, still clutching a crayon, her hair a tangled halo of exhaustion. A half-finished drawing lay on the table, Ilara at the piano with a big purple heart beside her. No wedding, no press release, no grand announcement of new beginnings. Just presence, just music. Julian sipped his whiskey eyes, never leaving Ilara. He no longer saw the waitress who once slipped a folded napkin beneath his check. He saw a woman who didn't break when misunderstood, didn't run when threatened, and didn't ask to be forgiven. She simply kept living. After the piece ended, Ilara stepped down and gently kissed Lily on the forehead. Julian said nothing. He just whispered, "You didn't just save the company. You saved the part of me I thought was lost." Ilara smiled. "Then keep it." In another world, perhaps they were lovers on the cover of Forbes. But here they were, simply two people with old scars, learning to hear life's melody, again imperfect, but true. And that was all they needed. Her music wasn't perfect, but it was hers. His company wasn't flawless, but it was honest. And in that imperfect harmony, they found a song only the broken could understand. Some battles aren't fought to win, but to protect what's right. Some songs don't need a grand stage, only a truthful heart. And sometimes the cracks in our past are where the first light comes through. If you believe that justice takes courage, that love takes time, and that forgiveness is a song played by two hearts, leave a comment below. Like, share, and subscribe to Toch Story, so you never miss another emotional, inspiring tale like this. We don't just tell stories, we play the strings of your heart.